stand.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is this thing on? Yes, it is. Exodus chapter 3, Moses was standing in front of the burning bush. God spoke to him and said, I have surely seen the afflictions of my people. I have heard their cry, and I know their sorrows. And I am now come down to deliver them out of the hands of the Egyptians. Sometimes we just need to be reminded that God does see and hear and know what we're going through in this life. Would you bow with me in prayer? God, we ask that your blessings be upon this time together as we do the work of the people of Chattanooga. In your name we pray, amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much, Councilman Henderson. All right. We have no special presentations today. Can I get approval on the minutes? Thank you so much. Minutes stand without objection. All right, council, if we take a look at our agenda for this evening, if you have any comments or questions, please hit your light. Ordinances under final reading, we have Parks and Outdoor. And that should be an alternate version. Any comments or questions regarding that? Councilman Ledford.
Madam Chair, my question is regarding planning item B on first read.
All right, yes, sir.
That question is simply, are we expecting another deferral, or will we hear this case this evening? If I may direct that towards Councilman Hester.
We're on, I'm sorry, we're on final reading.
Let me speak on that.
Real quick, I'm sorry, guys. I apologize. We are on ordinances under final reading, so we did Parks and Outdoor. And then planning item B was actually an item from District 7.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. Just
Yeah,
wanna make
I'm
sure.
sorry, I apologize.
That's
Jumped
okay.
ahead to first read on item B.
That's all right.
Yeah.
And then, so any comments or questions there? And the item under B is good to go. And I appreciate you all last week. Okay, ordinances on the first reading, legal item A, comments or questions, and then planning item B, Councilman Ledford, followed by Councilman Hester. Is that correct?
That's good.
Okay. All right. And Councilman Ledford had asked, what's this item? Should we expect another deferral?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, Councilman Hester, you gonna go ahead and hit your light?
Not today. I've spent a lot of hours into this, labored a lot on this. We've spent, 3 weeks? I spent a lot of sleepless hours on this particular zoning case, trying to find common ground. My goal and my aim as a councilman was to, as always, for the last 3 years, to build stronger families and stronger communities. I'm committed to that. I'm for progress, but we ask progress at what price? So I've knocked on doors. We did surveys. And overwhelmingly, it was the same cry. We don't want the zoning. I guess the last 18 years, started with Duke Franklin, then with Russell Gilbert, now I. So I want to be fair. So I represent the property owner, represent the folks in Mimosa. I admire, Mr. Friedman, your devotion, your dedication, your commitment to the cause. I sat down with Tina the other day. She's in Mimosa, and I could feel the pain in her voice. That she said for the last 18 years, we've been stewing over this thing, over this zoning change. And she had the same cry, that we don't want the zoning change. But overwhelmingly, it is the sentiment of all those Mimosa Circle. As I admire the unification of that community and what they're doing. It is indeed a struggle for me. I'm for progress, but we ask for what cause, and I've told them the pros, the cons, and the consequences of our inaction. How the ill effects of if we don't act, and what the ramification would be. So I don't want. I understand understand both sides. Historically, how we've there's always a hidden agenda. I understand that, a hidden agenda, a bait and switch. But I'm here to represent Mimosa and the people of Mimosa and take a stand for them. And to create conditions in which would never allow any type of bait and switch. So we asked for a site plan that would be dedicated specific only to that plan. So, and add all kinds of conditions. And I worked hard with Alan Jones there to come to a compromise where the property owner would be good neighbors, where where they made all kinds of concessions. Overwhelmingly, it's the same reply. We like the idea, but we don't want the zoning change. So my hands were tied on this, and I explained to Alan Jones, I'm for the will of the people. They elected me to represent them and to do the best thing for them. And also, I represent the city of Chattanooga, too. So my hands were tied on this, but I told Alan I have to go with the people and what they stand for. So I said all that to say that. I know historically we've seen a lot of, I'm quite sure Mr. Freeman has seen a lot of mischief when it comes to people saying one thing but doing another thing. So, but I'm for the will of the people, and I wonder if my colleagues, they have anything to say regarding that.
All right. Councilman Ledford?
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Obviously, this is in our agenda session, so my main question, if I may direct it to Councilman Hester, is are we going to be allowed to have a public hearing on this tonight so that we'll be able to hear the full case?
We are.
Okay.
We are.
Thank you, Councilman Hester. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you so much. All right, council, if you continue to look at your agenda for this evening, resolutions, economic development there. One for Councilman Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I noticed our mayor is here this afternoon. I'm assuming that he is here to talk on
Stadium.
council item A. Is that correct? Or is that something that we're going to have later in our agenda?
It's something we will have later in the agenda with our stadium update.
Okay. All right, I'll wait till that time then.
All right, okay. Where am I? Okay, resolutions, economic development, item A. We also have Family Justice Center, Fire and Public Works. Any comments or questions regarding those items? All right. All right, council, you take a look at next week's proposed agenda. And under that, item 9A, council office, we will be discussing that in the stadium update. Any questions about next week's proposed agenda? All right, council, if you take a look at your purchases for this evening, there are 4 purchases and 1 emergency purchase. Any comments or questions, please hit your light. All right, council, if you take a look at future considerations, if you have any comments or questions about that, please hit your light. All right. Okay, I don't see any. All right, today we do have our stadium update. And then followed by that, we do have a brief attorney-client meeting. So if there are no other questions about the agenda, please, we'll start with Jermaine or Mayor Kelly first. Whoever getting up, get on up. And we're gonna have our stadium update. Thank you for coming, Mayor Kelly.
Well, thank you all. It's been too long since I've been here, but I appreciate your time, ladies and gentlemen, and again, we're close to landing this plane after all these years, and it has been years of discussion and negotiation. And again, you'll hear from me, from developers, and from Mark Mamontoff, who's been our counsel throughout this. I will say, I want to thank ahead of time both Mark and Jermaine, who have worked. I mean, Mark's getting paid. I should note Jermaine, of course, is as well. But I mean, these guys have worked their tails off to get this deal down to the bone, and it is. But again, I've spent 30 years in business. I've negotiated a tremendous number of large deals. Nothing quite as opportune and important as this. But it is a great deal for us and for the taxpayers. And I just want you to know that I'm obviously staking my office and my reputation on that. Only time will tell. But you know, again, all I can say is that look at my background, look at my experience, and take me at my word. I don't have an ulterior motive here. Again, I'm a soccer guy, although I am a Lookouts fan as well. This really isn't about the stadium as much as it is about the larger development and about the vitality of a part of our town, which happens to be the Chairwoman's District, that has been bereft of economic opportunity for as long as any of us have been alive. And this project has the opportunity to reverse that, and in a way that nothing else could, quite honestly. Again, Younger is a reputable firm. The projections that they've given us tell us that it will generate $186 million for Hamilton County Public Schools, something that hasn't been talked about enough. Again, unlike a lot of communities, we're not carving out school funds. Those are big numbers. $102 million for you guys to play with. I should say city and county, and these are conservative projections. An additional projected $86 million just for our government through local option sales tax. Again, projected $1.1 billion in private development with a $2.3 billion economic impact, again from the Younger study, and all with a guaranteed maximum exposure of $112 million, which is a pretty darn good deal where I come from. Again, we have worked really, really hard to make sure that our incentives are aligned here, that developers do have sufficient skin in the game, and you know, and we're there. I want to say this though too. I've heard a lot of feedback from residents. I'm sure you may have too, who feel as though perhaps this administration has somehow not talked enough or God forbid abandoned our One Chattanooga principles in this. That is not the case. Nothing could be further from the truth. Because we can't be party to a community benefits agreement, we haven't really talked much about that community benefits agreement. Now, I hope and pray, and frankly, I'm quite confident that the parties will arrive at a constructive community benefits agreement. But make no mistake, I mean, for the record and for the people in the back, this administration will in no way, shape, or form compromise its very strong principles around the One Chattanooga plan regarding this project. We just had partners. We're part of the Southern Cities for Economic Inclusion. We had folks this morning here from the Atlanta Fed and from the Treasury Department talking about ways that we can use the Community Reinvestment Act to increase affordable housing in the South Side, to create entrepreneurship and small business opportunities for the historical residents in that neighborhood. We are not only are we not backing up on those commitments, we're doubling down, regardless of what happens with the community benefit agreement. And I should say, look, we've never had a community benefits agreement in this community for a project like this, ever. So whatever is negotiated there will be progress on its face. Again, I just want to, we've got some exciting things. The Alton Park Connector, which is a big priority for us in terms of, we hope to get a federal injection there that will help us complete that project. This project will transform the South Side aesthetically and economically. So I appreciate everybody's support here, particularly you, Chairwoman Dotley, for your cooperation. And it's been a very, very, again, long and difficult process, but appropriately so, because again, this is a very, very important thing for the future of our city. And I guess I'd just say this, look, as I said when you guys first approved the bond issue, there's never really been a time in Chattanooga where we had a golden era. And I think, look, if you are Charlie Brown and that football's been pulled away from you time after time after time after time, as a community, you tend to adopt pessimism as a strategy because you're never going to be disappointed if you're a pessimist, right? We are at a period of time in this community where we have to shift gears and believe in ourselves and believe that this community can do better and can reach higher. And this project represents that. So again, I appreciate your faith and confidence in us as administration, and I appreciate your support. And again, with that, I will turn this over to Mark Mamontoff for a presentation of a lot of the details, and I'll stick around in case you have any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Excuse me. Hello again. I'm Mark Mamontoff with Bass, Breen, Sims. We are bond counsel to the city, and we've also been asked to serve as bond counsel to the Sports Authority to help finance this transaction. So that's our role. I know many of you were at the chamber thing, so I'll try to be very brief with my introductory slides. This is just a reminder where we started over 18 months ago in terms of you all approved a resolution to support an $80 million bond issue with a maximum interest, what's called true interest cost of 6%. And that it has a final maturity of 30 years. That maturity is tied to a state statute that allows us to get the sales tax revenues, the state portion, or the vast majority of the state portion over a 30-year period. And so that's the basis for that maturity. Again, the $80 million is the maximum principal amount. The way municipal bonds work, these likely would be sold as a premium to be able to generate enough to cover cost of issuance and capitalized interest until the stadium is opened. Again, as a reminder, how are we going to pay for these bonds? The sales tax revenues I just mentioned, the team rent $1 million a year, increasing at a 1.5% escalator until the other revenue streams are adequate to pay debt service. And then the incremental property tax revenues that we did in the economic impact plans. Again, it carves out for the county, it carves out the school portion and their debt service portion, and for the city, it carves out your debt service portion. And so there are significant funds that will start flowing to both the county and the city, but the increment other than that would be available to pay. It would flow through the industrial development boards, and they've agreed to contribute those monies to the Sports Authority, which would then be made available to pay debt service. And then what you all approved in the interlocal agreement was to make up any shortfall 50-50 with the county. And again, we went through that younger analysis. They projected in the first year that after the stadium was opened, if things work like people hope, it'd be about a couple $100,000 contribution. If it doesn't work like people hope, they sort of had a worst case scenario, but it all depends how much you will have to fund on how the development progresses. And we try to come up with a real-time estimate based on what we are being told right now on the status of the development. And that's what the younger numbers were based upon. So when costs escalated so much, and this is endemic across the country, the team came to us and said, look, we understand that 80 million is the cap, but we need $40 more million to safely construct a stadium that we estimate will not cost more than $120 million. So they said, look, we will make a loan to the Sports Authority for the difference and ask to be paid back from any excess incremental tax revenues from the South Broad District after each year after the payment of debt service on the 80 million. If there's excess in each year, it would go toward that. And they, like many construction loans, it would be at a variable rate of interest. At least that's what's been currently proposed. And state law has one sentence that says any debt of the Sports Authority has to be approved by the entities that created the Sports Authority. So that's you and Hamilton County. It's a joint board. So that is what would be asked to be on your agenda next week, is an approval of this additional loan. So as you all, I'm sure, have read in the media, there were continued negotiations after this was presented at the chamber. And now the most current proposal would be to reduce that 40 million to a maximum of 32 million. And the team and the developer, the site owner, I've called them both at various times, but they would agree to cover anything above 112. And so if it does end up being 120, they would cover $8 million. If it ends up being 125, they would cover whatever the difference is above 112. And so if it's less than 115, they're guaranteeing that they would put in $3 million of capital into this project. So in other words, even if it came in at 112, they're still agreed to put in $3 million. But only if it's above 115 would they put in the remaining 5 is what's currently been negotiated. And so that is a little bit of a change from what we, not a little bit, it's a significant change from what we had. I mean, Jim Irwin and others at that meeting said that they would make sure there are no cost overruns, but this is a much more finite obligation. To help pay for that $3 million, we spent quite a bit of time negotiating parking revenues and certain other terms of the lease. This is not a ton of money, but it's important, is that the parking in this area that's anticipated, as you may have seen at the thing, there'd be 2 fairly large surface lots next to the stadium originally. Over time, hopefully those surface lots will, hopefully we have tons of development and those surface lots will eventually get absorbed into the development. You'll have structured parking available for folks going to games. And so someday in Knoxville, for example, and where I've worked on that transaction, we have no dedicated parking whatsoever because we're in a very urban area and people can park a whole lot of places. There's like 5,000 spaces within a half a mile walk of the thing. Here, you're going to have dedicated parking, but hopefully this will become a very urban, walkable area and it'll become less needed. But in the real recognition that at least initially, for a good period of time, parking will need it, they've agreed to pay $250,000 a year of parking revenues to the Sports Authority in addition to what paid, which is slightly different from what was originally talked about 18 months, 2 years ago. The Sports Authority would then take on an obligation to pay utilities up to that $250,000 amount. This basically gives the team more flexibility to borrow additional funds than what they anticipated so that they could make this $3 million capital contribution by freeing up some money from the utilities. The Sports Authority would not be subject to any cost above the $250. In other words, if utilities were $270, they would pay the difference. When the interlocal agreement was approved by you all, again, 18 months ago, it provided essentially in the 5th year for $150,000 a year to go in a capital reserve fund. That's really not adequate by a stadium of this magnitude. And we sort of knew that we'd have to spend more time analyzing that, and we just didn't have great information at the time. It really needs more of an accelerated step up, and based on some expert help in Knoxville, we developed a step up, and basically the discussion would be to cover the difference between what's committed under the interlocal agreement and what would be needed to make that up out of the tax increment revenues. That would not be relevant until about the 8th year after the stadium opened, but just wanted to call that to your attention. It's really obviously very important that you keep the stadium in good shape and not let it deteriorate. And so if you need a new roof or something, you don't want to come out of the city budget, you want to make sure there are funds on hand to cover that. A couple other, I don't want to call them minor because they're actually quite consequential. So the subordinate, and I call it a subordinate TIF or whatever you want to call it, the loans now $32 million. Again, they will not get paid until the debt service each year has been adequate to pay, the revenue has been adequate to pay the $80 million of debt service. As a result of that, there may not be funds to pay those loans until, say, 28 or 29 based on the younger projections. And even then, you won't be able to fully amortize them probably till about 2031, again, based on the younger projections. So what will happen is you'll have accrued interest on those loans for which there will not be a source of funds to pay at that time. So one thing that we spent quite a bit of time negotiating is they're not going to get interest on interest. In other words, they've advanced that money to pay those loans, but if you compound interest on interest, as those of you, all of you well know, mathematically it's magical. Hopefully I'll be able to retire one day due to that, the compounding theory, but by not compounding interest, our rough calculations is that saved the city and the county over $5 million. So that was a significant give on their part because they were counting on compounding the interest on the interest. And so this is something we spent quite a bit of time talking about. The other thing that's so critical to us, and we've made this clear, we're not really sure exactly what form this will take is as you all know from the chamber presentation, we already know we have a good chunk of development already going on in the South Broad District. Some of it is probably directly related to the thought that the stadium will come, some maybe not, but it's in the South Broad District, roughly 125, 130 million of already new increment is being created in the South Broad District. You know, Core is wanting to move forward. They've already pulled a building permit, but of course they want to see, that's the property that part of the Wheeling Foundry site that's been sold to another developer from Nashville. They obviously want to see the stadium moving forward before they move forward with their $170 million development. And so, and then obviously Jim Irwin, who's a fine developer from everything that we all can tell and done some beautiful work in Atlanta and Nashville. He obviously wants to see the stadium, but at the same time as we want to see, it's a two-way street. We want to make sure that's coming out of the ground with the stadium because we're counting on that increment. We roughly need to get up to about 500 million to 550 million of new increment to be able to cash flow the $80 million of debt. If Jim does sort of what we hope, plus Core does what we hope, and plus what's already in the pipeline, we are very, very close to already being there. And so one thing we really will be spending some time negotiating over the next few weeks is firm commitments as we can to make sure those projects would be moving forward simultaneously with the stadium to protect the city and the county. Those are the main differences from just, 2 weeks ago, when I guess last saw you guys. I'm glad to answer any questions. You know, this is obviously, these, I feel like we are getting to the point that there's really, that sometimes in negotiations you sense you're coming to a head, and I feel like that's sort of where we're coming to. So glad to answer questions. What would be on your agenda is I think next week, if you choose to do that, would be a resolution authorizing the Sports Authority to issue this additional $32 million.
All right, thank you so much. And we do have a couple of questions. Councilman Henderson, followed by Councilwoman Burrs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mark, so just to be very clear, if we only reach $550 million for 30 years, what happens to the $32 million?
They don't get paid.
And it does not fall on the city in any sort of way. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Yes. So they are highly incentivized to fully develop the Wheeling Foundry site.
The capital savings that you referred to, I'm assuming that will be calculated as well. In other words, we'll do the 500, it takes the 550 million to service the debt on the 80. We'll need a little bit additional investment to have the capital savings. Will that be included in that total as well before we start servicing the 32 million?
Well, and I think the bank is here. We certainly have to work out the exact priority with their lenders because they're counting on those tax revenues. But the amount we're talking about is roughly $250,000 at most in any year. So I don't think this will be ultimately a huge sticking point, but it's pretty critical that you build up a good reserve fund for capital improvement.
So,
sorry I didn't answer your question directly, but I think the answer is yes.
I've got two other questions or comments. Just to be very clear, if at some point, well, hopefully at some point, we get above the 550 million, the debt service on the 80 and the debt service on the 32 million will run concurrently.
That's correct.
It won't be like we pay off the 80.
That is correct.
That's a zero balance, and then we'll start paying on the 32. They run concurrently.
That's right. And several people asked me about that, Councilman Henderson, and I want to make sure that I made this point, if you don't mind, is that the 80 will be at a much lower interest rate than the other one. It's sort of like if you had two credit cards outstanding, one at 12% and one at 6%. It's really good to pay off the 12% one because it's still being paid from tax increment from public funds, and so it's good to pay it off. The other reason you want to keep the other one outstanding is the team is signing a 30-year lease, so you already have that revenue stream for 30 years, plus you have the state commitment for 30 years. It may make sense in the 25th year to pay it off a little bit early, but I don't think it'll make a lot of sense to pay it off significantly early.
Okay. So I don't know if Chief wants to get involved in this question at some point or not, but Mark, you and I had a conversation about the IDB.
Yes, sir.
Reimbursing the $32 million without raising the debt ceiling for the Sports Authority. And Chief, you might want to answer this, I don't know. I would rather go that route. I'm trying to figure out what the problem is that we wouldn't just allow, and I know we would have to amend some agreements, but why would we not just allow the IDB to reimburse the 32 million so that the accounts are kind of kept separate? And instead of raising the debt ceiling for the Sports Authority and making it look like we're sort of, because even in the resolution, it says approving the issuance of additional debt, making it look like we're sort of on the hook for it. And Mayor, I heard you say that we're sort of limited to $112 million of exposure. The TIF is exposed to the 112. We really only have exposure for the 80. But Mark, why would we not allow the IDB just to reimburse the 32 million?
Well, there are two questions there. One is just reimbursing versus doing a loan. If you only reimburse them the time value of the money, they would be losing, and I'm sure they are like, oh my gosh, we can't do that, sort of. I'm sure that's what they're thinking, because the time value of money over a 30-year period is very, very substantial. But from my perspective, if they would agree to reimbursement versus a loan, I would do backflips for you all, but I don't think they would economically accept that. Versus the legal issue is a great one, and after you asked that question, I really did spend quite a bit of time a few days ago going through each document. We'd have to amend both economic impact plans, which would mean we'd have to call both IDBs together, have a public hearing for each, because Councilman Henderson, honestly, I just didn't anticipate this in those economic impact plans. So they provide for the flow through to the Sports Authority. So they would be minor amendments. We would have to basically do some minor amendments to allow each IDB to do this versus the Sports Authority. So we'd have to have public hearings in front of both IDBs, approvals from both IDBs, approvals from this body, and approval for county commission to go through the IDBs versus thing. Economically, I mean, the IDB can do a loan as well versus a reimbursement, so it's sort of two different issues, but economically, it's a wash, and certainly, and I felt bad after I did it, jokingly, it just creates legal work, and I didn't mean to be so flippant about it, but it's not a ton of legal work, it's just, time and doing those hearings over and stuff again, so.
Chief,
again,
any additional thoughts as to why we wouldn't go that route?
Not than that, the only additional thought I would have is that this 32 million would be unequivocal that it would be limited to payment to these incremental revenues. There would be no, big bold letters that the city and the county have no obligation to pay that debt. So, I will do the absolute best I can to make sure it's clear that you all are not, the city is not taking on any additional liabilities. That's all I really can offer. Jermaine, did you want to add something?
Yeah, the only other thing that I would add to Mark's point is you could certainly go that route, but it would require, as Mark pointed out, the two public hearings, because remember, there are really two economic impact plans in this deal, not one. There was an economic impact plan approved by the county IDB, as well as an economic impact plan that was approved by the city's IDB. So we would need to hold public hearings again before both industrial development boards, have votes by both industrial development boards, and then the city council and the county commission would still have to take action. It just wouldn't be, you wouldn't be taking action with respect to the Sports Authority, you would be taking action with respect to the IDB. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Yeah. That's it.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Councilman Henderson. Councilwoman Burrs, followed by Councilman Leverett.
So Councilman Henderson asked the legalistic questions that I would ask, but I have two a bit lighter questions. When you say here, I'm looking at your slide.
Sure.
And I guess with my background, if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist.
Yes.
So let me tighten up for the record some of what language I think might be a little loose. All right. When it said firm commitments for initial development from site owner and core would be required as a condition of closing, that's great. how do you see that happening? And is that a written commitment, and to what extent? What does that mean?
In Knoxville, we had written commitments to build 2 buildings costing roughly $140 million right next to the stadium.
Sure.
We did it in a little bit different manner than we were going to do here because we were using pilots a little bit along with TIFs, more than you all certainly want to hear today. But because of the documentation we were doing, we did it through those pilot and TIF documents. Here, there will be a number of documents, a parking agreement, but I envision some type of overarching development agreement with the site owners in which that type of commitment. Of course, again, I'm sure there's like, what will this look like? The honest answer is we got to finalize that, but I greatly appreciate your comment and recognize that it is a little loosey-goosey. I wish I could hand you, well, here is going to be the magic document, but it's something that I just feel like it's important to highlight for you all.
I don't need the exact verbiage.
Yeah.
I guess what I need is what you just said. There will be a written document that will meet the commitment issue that you're talking about, and it will be signed, dated, notarized,
Yes.
all of that.
Yes, Councilman. The only thing I would like to add, if you don't mind, is that Core, they sold that property to Core, and I don't, we have not had any further, we've talked to them about this, and they feel comfortable, I believe, with the concept. We haven't had long discussions at length with Core yet.
That's cool, and I
Yeah.
think that's reality. When I saw this language, it looks great, but
Yeah.
I just was checking on the reality, so thank you.
Picked up on my mushiness, I'm sorry, yes, thank
That's
you.
okay.
Yeah.
Let's go to the previous slide. Okay. The second bullet, and I may be slow to pick up on this, it says, the Sports Authority, the approach provides a funding source for the team's $3 million capital contribution. Does that mean the Sports Authority is funding the team's obligation?
The quick answer is somewhat yes. Our initial discussions with the team was that they would cover all utilities during the life of the lease.
Right.
By doing this, it frees up cash flow from them having to cover the utilities under the lease, and it frees up some cash flow for them to do additional borrowing so that they felt comfortable that they can commit to a $3 million capital contribution. And so that is the basis for that.
So does that mean that the Sports Authority will be providing or making it comfortable for the team to meet its commitment?
We're not going to back it or guarantee in any way, but the flow of funds is going to make it easy, is making it possible for them to do that. I'm not sure I'm not answering your question, but yes.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Okay, I think I got the answer
Yeah.
I was asking. Thank you.
yeah.
Okay.
All right, yes, you good, Councilwoman Burrs?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, Councilman Ledford, followed by Madam Vice Chair Hill and Councilwoman Coonrod.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mark, I don't know if anybody's here from CORE to answer this question. So,
They're not here today.
okay,
yeah.
but you might be able to, through even the numbers from Younger, which came into question recently. So back when we originally approved the TIF, it was an $80 million, and then it was a $170 million. Councilman Henderson was very wise to tie that into the vote, which I think, so with the cost of inflation, and I didn't get a chance to ask CORE, who I know was in the room during our chamber presentation, well, that number has to have changed as well. Do we know what that number now is? If anybody can
I got it.
answer that question. It was 170, as we're obviously looking for the 5 to 550.
Good afternoon, everybody. We do not know. I think their Phase 2 project, which is a large part of that number, Councilman Ledford, it'll adjust depending on if there's a stadium or not. So they have not updated their numbers. They're still holding with the same number they've been carrying the whole time, which is that approximate 170 million total project value.
Okay, and was that Phase 1? Because you mentioned
That's
there are
the
multiple
total.
phases.
It's multiple phases.
Right.
So that would be the entire project. It encompasses approximately 9 acres. They have purchased at this time 2 acres from us. There's another 9 to go in that project.
Okay, and then the numbers from, this might be probably for Mark. Mark, can you speak? Is anyone here from Younger?
No, there's no one from Younger today.
Okay, I know we had them in the
I
chamber
probably can
presentation.
answer their questions, but yes.
Well, yeah, and I found it interesting because I had asked in that meeting, trying to see where we're at for the entire area. The entire area has not been forecasted in the revenues to pay this back, and I found that actually kind of comforting because that means there is money out there that has not been accounted for in development that I know and seen coming out of the ground since they last did their projections. So that was my question. I don't think I'm going to get that answered.
No, I can answer it directly
Okay.
because I was the person coordinating with them on what we wanted to see, which was, we only asked them to see what we believe is currently in the pipeline,
Okay.
which is what we know is already under construction, what Core, the 2 phases that Core told us they were going to do, plus what Jim estimates he will do on the remainder of the Wheeland Foundry site. So we intentionally excluded everything else in the South Broad District from that. So all of those are unaccounted for additional revenues that could be available to help avoid some funding by the city and county. So I think Andy actually has spent quite a bit of time analyzing the entire district and what sites are available and things like that. And he may be able to add more to that, but there's certainly significant opportunities for additional development in the South Broad District once hopefully the whole area is sort of ignited by all this development.
Well, actually, I find that fascinating. Andy, do you mind? Tell me more about your projections that are not forecasted that you have done, because if you drive around, you'll see there's quite a bit of, wait a minute, is this in the calculations or not?
It is not in the calculation. As Mark said, Younger report, it's $127 million is what is in the Younger study. That is 4 projects that are currently completed or almost completed. There is at least 7 other projects on or under construction. We are tracking right now somewhere between $500 and $600 million of work inside of the South Broad District that is not covered in the Younger study. This is from conversations that we've had with individual developers. Many other developers have also already purchased property in the South Broad District in anticipation of this project happening, which will further accelerate that. These are numbers that, we have a lot of relationships in the local community. We have a very strong local community. We've talked to just folks who are saying, we're going to do an apartment, we're going to do a hotel, and here's a range of numbers. So some of these things have been in the newspaper, some of them have not. It's a map that we have and we track because this is important to us. The only way we get paid back the $32 million is for this TIF district to be successful. The private sector here is taking that risk. We talk about guarantees, we're putting our money in up front, and for us to be paid back out, development needs to be successful, and it's not just the site, it's for the district at large. So we feel very confident about what's to come and what this will do to catalyze South Broad.
Okay, so if I were to go home and explain this to my 14-year-old, I would say that the projections we're working off of are very conservative, but they are not the entire picture, and there is more out there that is to be considered. I'm seeing a lot of nodding heads. Would Younger and Mark, would you agree with that? Because the reason I say that is I'm really trying to make sense. I want to make sure we cover and we're responsible to the citizens and the taxpayers of the city that we're there. We're there to cover this debt and this investment. And I feel like there's an unspoken support in financial revenue that's not been calculated yet. And I feel, upon my own research, that there's tremendous opportunity out there still waiting to break ground.
Yeah,
that has not been calculated.
Yeah, I'm really glad you asked Andy to report on that. I had not heard the numbers, not that he was hiding them, I just had not heard the numbers of outside development. Obviously, if those occur, and I'm sure a great majority of them will occur, that would essentially eliminate any shortfall in the 80 million almost with, by the time the stadium was open if they move forward. So you're absolutely right. We're trying to be so conservative and only show you all what we knew about. And Jermaine and his team had scrubbed the papers and looked at building permits, and those were the projects we felt certain of. But yes, we believe that even if Jim Irwin and New City as master developer on the Wheeland Foundry side only does half of what he says, it would be made up from stuff outside the Wheeland Foundry side such that this debt will be paid. But Yes, I believe the numbers were conservative.
And I just wanted to chip in. I think this is an opportune moment to remind folks, 'cause look, we kind of live in this world and have been living in this world for a number of years now, and this is kind of arcane municipal finance stuff, but it's important to remind folks again how the TIF works, right? That these revenues are created they're paid, not by people paying property taxes in East Brainerd, very frankly, Councilman, but by the people who are paying property taxes in the TIF district. And,
Yes.
and it's the revenues created by the rise in the values there. So it is close to bootstrapping as you can possibly get.
Yes. All right. That's it for me. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Councilman Ledford. Madam Vice Chair, followed by Councilwoman Coonrod and Councilman Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, a comment. As I've been someone who has really advocated for some of the other projects that were intended to be funded with this TIF, one of them being the Alton Park Connector, and I've spoken in previous public settings about my appreciation of some TIF increment going to help produce downtown school as part of the One West Side TIF. As I've reflected more on that stance, it does occur to me that this investment of $112 million of public money will be a catalyst in a way that building a new high school cannot be. A new high school is critical, quality facilities, and obviously that is not the primary responsibility or even official responsibility of the city of Chattanooga. But when I drive in my district, I have a piece of land that has a mattress firm on it. No offense, mattress firm, but it is far from the highest and best use of that piece of property on North Market Street, and the signage is obnoxious. I do see that having a master developer situation in this portion of our town will create change on a massive scale in a way that other county or municipal projects would not be able to propel growth as quickly. That said, I want to talk a little bit about the why of some of this maneuvering of this deal, because it feels a little bit like a cup moving around, and I'm watching the ball and I'm wondering, why is one better than the other? So in our county and city gathered meeting at the chamber, there was conversation about developers getting close to and the Sports Authority getting close to a guaranteed maximum price contract. So when I heard that we were, suddenly as taxpayers only looking at $112 million, I thought, well, obviously the costs have come down from the 120 that were had been advertised and planned for. So I'm not feeling, I have a hypothesis that's not the gift it feels like. I have a hypothesis that the numbers have gotten tightened up and we're in a somewhat different place. So number one, can you answer that? Is our guaranteed maximum price contract available, and is it in fact less than $120 million?
I can answer the question. The GMP is not yet available, probably will not be available to the middle of March. And he's here, so he's probably going to kick me, but Bill Payne, I called him, obviously, I said, Bill, what is this really going to cost? Is it 115? Is it 120? And an hour and a half later, we still don't, I mean, what Bill, I think he can certainly answer the question better than I can possibly, but we just don't know. We don't think it'll go below 115 based on the current design. We think it easily could get to 120. In my best guess, it's going to be somewhere between 115 and 120. He's got a lot of great preliminary pricing from people that have looked at the specs, but until you have construction, you go through DDs, as they call them, design drawings, then you move to construction drawings. They're just finishing up the DDs, and they're going to be finishing up the CDs, as they call them, and we'll be able to get firm pricing sometime in March. And so we would, at that point in time, and again, I want to make sure the public, and particularly you all understand this, the GMP will only be the construction cost of the stadium. So the budget is the whole $115 to $120 million. That includes all the design costs, which are very substantial, as you might guess, of a stadium of this nature. It includes the city and the county having an owner's rep to keep I'm sure they're honest, but to keep them honest, look over every construction draw, things like that will be built into this. The total, so when we talk about GMP, I just want to make sure as that term is used, that will not be the 115 to 120. The GMP will be 80%. The rest of it is soft costs. Actually, I'm not in there, but
Well,
I was pointing at myself.
Thanks for pointing that out,
Yeah.
Mark, because to Chairman Ledford's point about when he goes home and can describe this deal to his 14-year-old, there are a lot of slides that we see that's like, oh, lookouts are going to put in $3 million. And then you see, well, actually, $3 million if it's more than 115, but then 8 million if it's more, like, that was new information to me. I don't know if you noticed my face. I do have Botox that doesn't move that much, but nonetheless, I was like, what? And then I'm wondering about this.
I missed that one, I'm sorry.
Well, hey, $250,000 a year that we would get for parking. Parking was one of those questions of, are we getting parking? Are we not getting parking? But then that's followed by a bullet that says, oh, but by the way, we're getting $250 for parking, but we're going to give you $250 for utilities. Where's the ball, man? And at what point are the taxpayers getting a better deal, or are we just getting a different deal that's trying to answer questions where people talk about more skin in the game, but are we giving skin away to get skin somewhere else?
That's a great question. I put it in the slide because of the very type of questions I expected, that it does seem like things moving around, and I don't want, we want to take this head on. In my judgment, it is a slightly better deal than was originally 18 months ago when I first started working on this project, when Brent Goldberg was here, and we estimated roughly monetizing the parking revenues for about $1.9 million, and then flowing some of it through the Sports Authority. Here, we're trying to monetize that and get $3 million up front, and so slightly better deal for the community. Is it earth-shattering? No, but I feel like you all need to understand, why are we even bother going through this? I'm sure you're asking. It's largely due, and Jason can address this, is so that he can, he was planning on paying $1 million of rent a year. Now we're asking him to come up with skin in the game, some money up front, and he needed a payment source to be able to justify that. And by moving this around through rent versus the thing, it allows him to be able to come up with $3 million up front. And it's a slightly better deal for the community than what we talked about 18 months ago.
But we get the $3 million in parking, but we give $3 million in
Yes, and the difference is really
utilities.
well, two thoughts. One is utilities on the current stadium are running around 180. And so it's actually, there is a delta there that we would get to keep. And the lights for this stadium will be way, way more efficient than the lights on the current stadium. So we hope that the delta will even be bigger unless Jason leaves the lights on all night long, and then he'll end up paying for them if it goes over 250. But, so there is a delta there that we hope to get some money off of.
Our new zoning won't let him leave the lights on all night. We discussed that about an hour ago. Okay, so with this new structure, talk to us about years 1 through 10, debt service versus TIF increment. And what is the money that's going to be coming out of our general funds while we cover this?
So this has not changed since the chamber presentation. So if, I'm going to set aside Councilman Ledford's point because it's really important about, we totally ignored all development outside those three things. But if those three things that we explained happen based on what we have been told would be happen, in the time frame that they would happen, that was that $189,000 in I think it was 2027 fiscal year that the city and the county would have to split. Do things always work out as planned? No, certainly there's a lot of variables in that. It could work out better, it could work out worse. Again, JP Morgan did a numbers run if only 50% of it was built and we had negative, we were making contributions from the city and the county for 4 or 5 years under that circumstances. I'm thrilled to hear what Andy was saying about if we have 200 or 300 million that comes online outside what we have outlined in the Younger report, then the likelihood that 189 is a realistic number is really, really good.
So 189 in FY '27, what about '26?
We're capitalizing interest in the bond issue. That was the premium that we were
Okay.
going to do. So we were going to not have to pay interest through I mean, that still has to be finalized based on the timing of the bond issuing line, but basically, under state law, you're allowed to include interest in the bond issue for the construction period and up to a year after that.
Okay. When we add in a plan for $250,000 a year for utilities and $250,000, I believe you said, starting year 8 for a capital fund, how does that impact the?
That will not affect that number because if it is all worked out as we're discussing, it would just mean a slightly lower amount available to pay their $32 million. It would not affect your shortfall.
Can I just ask one? No,
Yeah.
please don't go anywhere, because I just want to clarify, since we have the media here, I just want
Yes.
to clarify something. When you said slightly better deal, you're talking about the parking arrangement, not the overall arrangement.
No, I feel like the overall arrangement, we've made significant progress. I was just talking about that one narrow aspect of it, yes.
Just wanted to clarify.
Yes, thanks.
Well, I don't know.
Yes.
Okay, that's all my questions for now. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm a lawyer, not a salesman. It's like,
All right.
yeah, he's a
All
salesman.
right. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. Councilwoman Coonrod, followed by Councilman Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. That was a good save from our mayor, but they've already hammered about the money. I'm gonna take it a different direction.
Sure.
Because the property is in the opportunity zone. We're talking about an area that's make $13,000 or $64,000 a year, with 17% of that area is in poverty. So for me to take, and I'm a baseball, softball fan. I played in school too. Just wanted to let my mayor know in case he decided to leave soccer. But the economic opportunities that I could see that would be great for that area. They help those residents get employment. I can imagine that the infrastructure around the area will be improved because of this project. So for a little concerned about the surcharges of the ticket fees and different things like that that comes with the stadium, and how would that fall on the residents or the people to come to that. But my really main concern is the hiring practices, because also, you know, what I gave you, the 17% of this area is in poverty. You can imagine the amount of people who live in this area that have background challenges.
Right.
And for them to be able to be employed, and I heard the mayor say they're working on a community benefits agreement. That's what's important to me, is to make sure that people that live in this community or surrounding communities are able to be employed there. And then also, we know that property taxes more than likely will go up. The landlords are gonna more than likely move towards market rate rents. What will be in place, or are you all working with our affordable housing team to put incentives and measures in place that will protect our lower income families? And that, so that's a concern of mine, and I see the mayor he's shaking his head in that, so I'm glad to even know that.
Now, let me speak to a piece of that. I think, Councilwoman, regarding the last piece around affordable housing, you may know that we are working with the developers, and I think we're working with the legislature to see if we can get some state law change so that we can offer affordable housing incentives in exchange for zoning variance, which we cannot currently do under state law. Again, state law also keeps us from being party to that community benefits agreement, but as I said before, we're working very hard to make sure that we do arrive at one that's constructive. And again, this is not separate and apart from the rest of our One Chattanooga agenda. We're not suspending our judgment or our principles to make way for this deal. I see this as actually a really important part of it. So again, we tried to be careful because of the law, not to kind of stick our nose in the middle of something where it legally can't be. But again, we are, that stuff is not changing. I don't know if there are other elements of that Mark needs to address, but.
The only thing I was going to add, Councilwoman, is that the lease draft that we're working on has as strong as we believe is possible from a constitutional perspective, hiring practices to try to hire from the area and things like that. I know you know this very well. There's just so many, the community benefit agreement raises so many constitutional issues, and that's why, and a lot of this is modeled after the soccer stadium community benefit agreement in Nashville, which Metro Council, they never even saw the agreement because of the constitutional issues of that. And so it's a very difficult area, but the lease draft that we've been working from is, there will, the stadium itself doesn't generate that many jobs, but there's a lot of service jobs and a lot of, maintenance. And I don't mean maintenance like cleaning only. I mean things like repairing the HVAC and stuff that, there are strong provisions to try to hire as best we can. All I can assure you is we're going to do our best that we can.
Thank you. Maintenance workers make a lot of money.
What's that?
Contrary to maintenance workers
They
make
do,
a lot of
yes.
money depending
Particularly if
on
they're
how you
maintaining
pay the bill.
HVAC and things like that, yes.
Right, and janitorial
Yes.
people are owners, but, Rich has always worked, to hire people with background challenges, so I don't have any doubt that he wouldn't continue that practice. But the last thing that I would say is that making sure we still have equitable opportunities, access for everybody. I mean, we all think and want to believe that every child or family have been to a baseball game before, but there's a lot of people that haven't been able to have access to go. So I just want to make sure that we ensure the stadium and its benefits are accessible to all community members regardless of, income, those things. So that's the only thing that I really got.
I hope you know I'm totally with you. I'm also totally with you on the affordable housing. I spent much of my legal work doing affordable housing work, and I know that we're going to try to do everything we can in that area.
Thank you, I appreciate it. For a minute, I thought you was gonna start shouting and doing jumping jacks.
Yeah, no, I don't know what the appropriate thing is, but yeah, I agree with everything you said. So.
Thank you.
All right, you good, Councilwoman Coonrod?
Yep.
All right, and then finally, we have Councilman Henderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've got two follow-up. Hey, Chief, we've talked about the 80 million, we've talked about the 32 million, but there's another little number out there that we really haven't talked about, that we heard about, this first 10 million that we're putting in for infrastructure. Where is that 10 million? I haven't heard where that 10 million is coming from.
Right, so as you know, the city builds roads all the time, and so we do have the opportunity through this TIF, as you recall, that through the projections, we will get over $50 million of new property tax revenue and over $80 million of new local option sales tax revenue. So you'll see over $100 million of new revenue coming into the city, to the city's coffers over time. So we feel strongly that a $10 million investment for public infrastructure, whether it's an extension of East 26th Street or providing some public infrastructure that's key to the stadium, we will certainly get back over the time period. And so that's where that $10 million number comes from.
Yeah, and I would just add, we've looked at some other projects, and again, it is public infrastructure. That's what we're in the business of doing. We could get cute and carve out another subordinate TIF, but again, it seems like a modest investment to get to the, the center of the Tootsie Pop here, which
So-
is the rest of all this tax revenue.
So this 10 million is something that we would put in our capital budget?
We could potentially, and we could potentially also do it over a period of time. So not necessarily in one budget year, but it could be done over the course of a couple of fiscal cycles.
And at what year would this 10 million, I guess this infrastructure, at what year would that infrastructure need to be completed? Is this almost the very first thing that needs to happen?
Well, there is some key infrastructure that does need to happen in order to provide emergency vehicle access for the ballpark. But what we're being asked to do is to help provide and to put in some of that infrastructure, which in this case would probably be an extension of East 26th Street, which has already been improved and provides the primary sort of connectivity between Howard to the Wheel and Foundry site through Southside Gardens. And so, yes, there is the potential for us to be able to put in some of that infrastructure in the early years.
So is this 10 million, my understanding that was the cost of this first infrastructure need. Is that 10 million split between city and county, or is that all on the city?
So right now, it is a consideration that we are considering on the city side. And so this is something that we certainly feel like is something that is completely doable for the city, given the fact that we will see, as I said before, over the term of the TIF, over $100 million of new revenue that comes into the city,
So
not just
at
the
what-
city and the county.
Okay, at what year, like, what are we projecting, how far into the TIF would we, I
Would
guess,
you see the 10 million come back?
recoup the 10 million?
Yeah, I could double check that and give you an answer.
Okay,
Yeah.
if you would. And then the 3 million that they're putting in, when do they put that in, and can that 3 million not be used towards the 10?
That's a good question. So the 3 million would come in at the beginning of the project, So that 3 million comes in as soon as we get final approvals as to whether or not the Sports Authority is going to be able to issue the additional debt.
Okay.
And so as we start to roll through that process, then they would have the ability to put in that 3 million.
And why would we not put that 3 million towards this 10 that we're having to use for the infrastructure?
Well, so their 3 million is going towards the stadium though, so just keep that in mind. So when we're talking about the 3 million that the Lookouts are pledging to put in, they were pledging to put in $3 million towards the cost of the stadium to help us to close the gap on the stadium. For the point of reference for the council, it's important to note that in Knoxville, they had to do something similar for public infrastructure in Knoxville too. What the city of Knoxville and what Knox County did, which Mark could speak to better than I could, is they basically created a subordinate TIF to pay for additional public infrastructure that was needed for the stadium. So the $114 million cost that you've heard for the Knoxville Stadium does not include public infrastructure. And so when we're talking about a $115 or $120 million stadium here, the $10 million of additional infrastructure that we're being asked to do, that is also separate, just as when you talk about the Knoxville Stadium, that 114 is just the stadium cost, not the cost of the additional infrastructure. Knoxville and Knox County had to do a subordinate TIF in order to pay for their infrastructure. And it should also be pointed out that when they did their TIFs, Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, they also did not hold out school taxes, which is what we are doing here. So there is a significant source of revenue that is being held out from this total deal because it's going to the schools, which I think we can all get behind and support. But it does mean that there's a little less money to go into the TIF and a little less money to go to infrastructure. Mark, did I say anything wrong?
No, the only thing I would add is that in Knoxville, we had $30 million of public infrastructure, and roughly half came out of our version of EPB. The two mayors basically had some persuasive effect on them to accelerate some infrastructure needs in the stadium area. And then another roughly 14 million was pure city infrastructure. I do think I can answer your question though in terms of timing. There's two sources possibly to pay it. One is the sales tax revenues that'll be generated by that site. That probably would be about a 10-year recoupment based on just the Wheel and Foundry sites retail, roughly. And then as to local option sales taxes. And then if the Younger study is roughly accurate, and again, a lot of the assumptions there, then they'll, and you asked the great question is, these get paid simultaneously. If things work out well and their TIF gets paid off, could get paid off as early as like the 20th year, then we have substantial income stream after that also from property tax revenues to help reimburse ourselves for any infrastructure. And I've thought a lot about you in the Alden part, the need to do that. I wish that was sooner, but it's sort of where we are right now, I think, in terms of trying to make this deal work. But the sales tax revenues, as Jermaine mentioned, the gross amount, I think, was about $80 million. And that just is the retail that's projected in the core and the Wheel and Foundry side, not any additional increment up and down South Broad or something like that.
So let me.
Or personal property taxes, which we will get from day one.
Madam Chief, let me just follow up and make sure I understand where the 10 million would have to come out of our capital, but we'd have to put it in capital budget, right? I mean, I just want to understand where this money's coming from. So
Yes, sir.
at some point, I guess this coming 2025 capital budget, we're going to see a certain amount of money
Yes.
in the capital budget for this.
Yes. If the stadium is approved, then yes, that would be correct. Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you, Councilman Henderson and Madam Vice Chair.
Thank you. I just briefly want to come back to this $3 million and the utility payments. I just am wondering, what is the benefit to the taxpayer if we're committed to 112 million? What is the benefit to the taxpayer other than feel good, skin in the game, to have this $3 million cash commitment from the Lookouts that then we're essentially giving them back in the form of utilities? help me understand why that is a good choice for taxpayers.
Well, originally, the parking revenues, the discussion was to split it 50/50 and.
Wait, I'm not talking about parking revenue. Does
Right.
parking revenue have to go into the mix? Is that
Right.
okay? All
Well,
right.
what I was trying to say, and I'm sorry I was trying to get around it, is that instead of doing some sort of revenue split, this is a guaranteed $250,000 amount, even if they only collect $100,000 for parking. So we added some certainty to the amount that would be paid from what was discussed 18 months ago, which was again, a revenue split. And so so that is a little bit of a difference, and that certainty allows us to feel good about paying the utilities and possibly even having a little bit of extra on delta on top of that. Again, I probably should defer to either Jason or the banker to explain why this allows them to borrow separately.
Well, and what I want to understand with this is why is it better for taxpayers to accept the $3 million if it's over 115 when we're only committing to 112? Why do we even need that part of the deal?
Well, let me just say this. Again, it should be stated for the record, right? This is a deal that has to stand up scrutiny to both the city and the county.
So it
And so,
is
some of this frankly is optical.
an
I
answer
think.
to skin in the game.
Correct. Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I just want to make sure we're clear. The project right now, as we stand here before you, we believe is $120 million. What we have is, Mark mentioned the process where we are. We do not have CDs yet. The CDs are being worked on by the architecture team as we speak. When we go to market, the way this works in the project is you get bidding as it goes along. The Sports Authority has selected EMJ, Brassfield and Glory to be the construction manager for the team. So that $120 million is coming from them, right? When they go to bid, contractors and the market sees a project about as real as it is in terms of the time they spend putting numbers together on it. So until this next step happens and we go to the market to get, with the CDs, to get actual final pricing, we won't know what the final price of the stadium is. So we look at you right now and say we believe it's going to be $120 million. We hope that through contractor pricing, that number comes down. What this opportunity here in front of us says is the public is on the risk for the 80, right, the 40 by the city and the county, the 32 million in private debt that'll be repaid by the TIF only if development happens. After that, the lookouts are guaranteeing a completed stadium, so you'd have a completed asset at whatever that cost is going to be. So as Mark mentioned, if it comes in at 116 million, at 117, or 118, they're responsible for delivering, or we are, a completed project. But we do not know what that number is right now. So the $3 million is an assurity that the lookouts will have money into the stadium day one, if that makes sense. Does that help sort of explain where we are in the process kind of and how this will go? And so, as you go through the pricing, now that they know, again, if this goes forward, they'll know the project is real, they will dig into the weeds, they will really sharpen their pencils and get us the best possible number when we go to the final bids for this project.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
That's all, Madam Chair.
All right, thank you so much. All right, I don't see any additional lights. So with that, we will recess until 5:30. We do have an attorney-client meeting, so thank you all so much. All right. Oh, are we finished?